Right now, in dozens of countries around the world, a national team is doing the same thing. They are praying for a miracle. They are hoping that one generational talent gets born inside their borders, stays healthy, chooses to play for them, and drags an entire nation to glory. That is how the World Cup works for almost everyone. You wait, you hope, and you build a team around whoever fate happens to hand you. France does not do this. France does the opposite. And once you understand what France actually is, you will never watch them the same way again, because they are not really a team in the way most countries are. They are something stranger, something almost no other country in the 2026 World Cup can copy, no matter how much money they spend or how hard they try. Most people assume France is just good. Rich league, big population, lots of talent. That's the common explanation, and it isn't wrong. But it completely misses the point. Because if France were only a country with good players, they would rise and fall like everyone else. Great generation, then a decade in the wilderness. That's the normal cycle. Spain, Italy, England, even Brazil have all lived it in different ways. France has spent the modern era trying to break that cycle, and the way they did it is the whole story. I've spent this video pulling apart what actually makes France different from almost every other nation at the 2026 World Cup. The first men's World Cup with 48 teams, hosted across the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And what I found is that France has quietly inverted almost every rule the rest of the football world lives by. So stick with me, because by the end of this, you'll see the World Cup itself differently. Let's start with the thing everyone gets backwards. Every other nation is trying to build a team. France doesn't just build a team, France runs a factory. And to understand why that word matters, you have to go to a quiet estate about 50 kilometers southwest of Paris, surrounded by forest, called Clairefontaine. In 1988, France opened its National Technical Football Center there, and Clairefontaine became the symbol of a much wider development model. On the surface, it looked like just another training center. But what France was really doing was making a bet that few countries committed to with the same depth. The bet was this: instead of only waiting for talent to appear, you industrialize the production of it. You build a nationwide pipeline, amateur clubs, regional academies, professional training centers, scouts searching across cities and suburbs, and a central football culture that develops players from childhood. You stop hoping for geniuses and you start manufacturing them. Now here's the part that sounds almost too clean to be true. A decade later, France won its first ever World Cup on home soil in 1998. A country that had never lifted the trophy suddenly held it. And the man wearing the captain's armband that night was a defensive midfielder named Didier Deschamps. Remember that name, because he's going to matter more than you'd expect. But winning once doesn't prove a system. Anyone can get lucky once. The real test of a factory isn't whether it makes one great product. It's whether it can make the next one and the next one without the first one being present. And this is where France starts to separate from everybody else. Here's one of the strangest statistics in modern football. And it's the one that made me want to make this video in the first place. France doesn't just supply the French national team. France supplies the world. Look closely at the squads of other nations, not just European ones, but teams from across Africa and beyond. And you'll find players who were born in France, raised in France, and developed inside French academies, now wearing a completely different flag. When Morocco stunned the planet by reaching the semifinals in 2022, a huge portion of that squad had been born or trained in Europe, with France, Spain, Belgium, and the Netherlands all playing major roles in that wider footballing pipeline. Sit with that for a second, because it's genuinely bizarre. France produces so many good players that it can't even use them all. The overflow, the players who don't make the French cut, go on to represent other countries, and sometimes compete directly against the very football powers France is trying to beat. No other nation at the 2026 World Cup has that problem at quite the same scale. Every other coach on the planet is scrounging for 11 good players. France is turning good players away at the door. That's the first inversion. Everyone else prays for enough. France has too much. And if that were the only thing that made France the opposite of everyone, it would already be remarkable. But it goes deeper, and this next part is where it gets almost philosophical. Because there's a question buried under all of this that most fans never ask. If a team is just a collection of individuals, then what actually is the French national team? Most countries have an identity you can describe in a sentence. Brazil is flair. Italy is defense. Germany is machinery and mentality. England is set pieces and heartbreak. Argentina is emotion and a single sacred number 10. Each of these teams is, in a way, one idea, repeated across generations. Now try to describe France's style of play in one sentence. It's surprisingly difficult. And that's not an accident. That's the second inversion. Most teams have a fixed identity. France is a chameleon. Under Didier Deschamps, who took over as manager in 2012 and, remarkably, won the World Cup again in 2018, this time from the dugout, France did something that made purists furious and pragmatists take notes. They stopped caring about looking good. In 2018, France won the World Cup while often sitting deep, absorbing pressure, and striking on the counterattack with terrifying speed. Critics said it was ugly. They said France had all this talent and refused to entertain. And France's response was, essentially, "We're not here to entertain you. We're here to win." Think about how radical that is. Most nations are prisoners of their own mythology. They have to play a certain way because their fans and their history demand it. France freed itself from that. France will play beautiful football if beautiful wins, and it will play brutal, cynical, low-block counter-attacking football if that wins instead. It has no single old myth to protect, and a team with no fixed romantic identity is almost impossible to prepare for, because there's no single version of it to scout. You can't take away France's style, because France doesn't rely on only one. It can change. By the way, if you're already realizing that France breaks more rules than you thought, wait, because the next inversion is the one that actually made Didier Deschamps a footnote in history that almost no one else shares. When France won in 2018, Deschamps became one of only 3 people to ever win the World Cup both as a player and as a head coach. 3. In the entire history of the sport. The others were Brazilian legend Mario Zagallo and German icon Franz Beckenbauer. That's the company he keeps. And it tells you something about the French system that its captain from 1998 became the architect of 2018. The knowledge didn't leave. It compounded. The factory doesn't just make players. It recycles its own champions into the people who build the next champions. Which brings us to the third inversion. And it's the cruelest one for everybody else. Most teams peak once. France reloads. The normal life of a great national team looks like a wave. It rises, it crests, it crashes. And then the country spends 10 or 15 years rebuilding while it waits for the next golden generation to randomly appear. Spain won everything from 2008 to 2012 and then suffered years of World Cup frustration. England has often lived under the weight of hyped generations and unfinished promise. This is the natural rhythm of international football. Feast, then famine. France has spent the Deschamps era avoiding that kind of long famine. Just 4 years after winning the 2018 World Cup, France walked into the 2022 final again. Back-to-back finals, a feat so rare that no nation had done it since Brazil reached consecutive finals in 1998 and 2002. And the 2022 final itself became arguably the greatest World Cup final ever played. France fell behind Argentina 2-0 and looked finished. And then, a 23-year-old named Kylian Mbappé scored a hat-trick in the final. A hat-trick in a World Cup final, something that had not happened since Geoff Hurst did it for England in 1966. France still lost, on penalties, in the most agonizing way imaginable. But think about what that game proved. France reached the summit of world football, lost many faces from its 2018 identity, and still nearly won it all again, powered by a player who had barely been born when they won in 1998. That's not a wave. That's not a cycle. That's a conveyor belt. The generation changes, but the output doesn't. Griezmann eventually steps away, Mbappé becomes captain, and another wave is already waiting behind him. One star dims. Another is already glowing on the line. Every other team fears the day their best player retires, because it means the end. France treats its stars as replaceable parts in a machine that never stops running. And nothing tells you a team is a factory more clearly than the fact that it doesn't panic when its best product ages out. It just builds the next one. Now here's where I have to slow down, because this is the part that turns France from impressive into the actual opposite of everyone else. And it forces an uncomfortable question. For many nations, the team is a mirror of the country. When you watch Argentina, you feel like you're watching Argentina. Its passion, its pain, its identity, poured into 11 men. The team is the nation, emotionally. But France's real strength is something colder and, honestly, more modern than that. France's squad is one of the most diverse on the planet, drawing on the country's deep and complicated history of immigration. And that diversity isn't a decoration. It's part of the engine. It's one of the things that lets the factory pull talent from every corner of society and many different backgrounds, and fuse it into something few countries can match. And that raises the question that sits underneath this entire video. If France has no fixed style, if its stars are constantly replaced, if it produces more talent than it can even use and exports the rest to its own opponents, then is France even a team in the way we usually mean the word? Or is it something new? A kind of talent superstructure that happens to put on a blue shirt every 4 years, challenge the emotional identity-driven teams that much of the rest of the world builds, and then dissolve back into the factory that made it? That's why I say France is the opposite of every team at the 2026 World Cup, because everyone else is trying to become a team. France has spent years trying to transcend the need to be only that. But, and this is the final twist, so stay with me, this machine may be about to face the one thing it's never truly had to survive: change at the very top. Didier Deschamps has announced that the 2026 World Cup will be his last as France's manager. After more than a decade, after a final in 2018 he won, and a final in 2022 he agonizingly lost, the man who links 1998 to the present day is stepping away when this tournament ends. And so, 2026 becomes the ultimate test of everything I've just described. If France is truly a system and not just a lucky run of great individuals guided by one brilliant manager, then it should keep winning long after Deschamps is gone. But if the magic was really him all along, the captain who became the coach, the human thread holding the machine together, then 2026 might be the last time we see this version of France before the wave finally, inevitably, comes crashing down like it does for everyone else. That's the drama nobody's talking about. The 2026 World Cup isn't just France chasing a third star. It's France proving whether it's genuinely built different or whether even one of the most sophisticated football factories ever created is still, in the end, subject to the same brutal cycle that humbles every other nation. So when you watch France at this World Cup, across those stadiums in the United States, Canada, and Mexico, don't watch them like you watch everyone else. Don't wait for the flair or the fear or the emotional story. Watch them like you're watching a system stress test itself in real time. Watch whether the stars really are interchangeable. Watch whether a team with no fixed identity can win one more time before its master architect walks away. Because every other nation in that tournament is asking, do we have enough to win? France is asking a completely different, far more chilling question. Are we finally about to become normal, like everybody else? And if you enjoyed having a football story broken down this way, the psychology, the systems, the stuff beneath the surface that most channels never touch, then do one thing for me. Subscribe. I go this deep on the teams, the players, and the hidden machinery of the 2026 World Cup. And if you're the kind of person who wants to understand the game and not just watch it, this is the channel you'll wish you'd found sooner. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next one. Because the next team we take apart might just be the one that finally figures out how to beat the machine.